Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. As we talked about a bit earlier in the program, Russian dictator Vlad Putin gave a hour-long stemwinder last night, giving his version of the history of Ukraine dating back to the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, and announced that Russia would be recognizing the so-called breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine as, again, Russian land, essentially, right? We're not going to. You heard from his Russian ambassador to the U.S., Anatoly Antonov, over the weekend on Face the Nation, in which he said this.
And I would like to confirm there is no any plan to start war. We don't want war.
Don't want war. We just want our territory, and our territory happens to be in eastern Ukraine, is essentially the position. The reaction from the Biden administration, well, we're not sure what it's going to be because the reactions from the Biden administration continue changing, including with the latest backtracking of a backtrack, according to an Amazon Post reporter. On a media call, a senior administration official declined to say if Putin moving troops into separatist territories in eastern Ukraine constituted an invasion. But after, another official told her the administration defines an invasion as Russian troops entering a part of Ukraine not occupied since 2014. So now we're back to, minor incursion, quote unquote, the phrase that Biden used several weeks ago that was not defined. Now it is defined. And this provides cover for the U.S. to do more saber-rattling about sanctions, the imposition of some sanctions. And are the sanctions punishment or deterrence? Because they're perceived to be punishment based on how the administration was talking about them. If you do this, then we'll do that. And yet when Kamala Harris was over in Ukraine this weekend, she was referring to the sanctions as a tool of deterrence. It's all very confusing. And now we're at a position where we have to wait to see what Zelensky and the Ukrainians, his administration, want to do, whether or not they want to cede those separatist territories, quote unquote, or whether they want to fight for them. Does this escalate, or do those territories are those territories essentially annexed like Crimea with not much fanfare? Here's what Richard Haass, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, had to say.
Well, it's the beginning of the continuation, rather, of dismembering of Ukraine. We saw it with Crimea, and now this. But it's not going to stop there. I think it's highly, highly likely that the so-called leadership them of these two independent republics, quote unquote, would invite the Russians in for protection. Then you have a really interesting moment when the government of Ukraine is going to have to decide whether to simply let this be or whether it's going to attack. Or maybe the Russian side will attack, and that will start an exchange. So to me, the bigger question is whether, if and when the Russians go into these eastern republics, whether that's simply a prelude to something much larger, and that's my fear. This is bad, but as we've often learned, bad situations could get much worse. In this case, much, much worse.
Is it about to get much, much worse? For help with that question, we're pleased to be joined by Cliff May, president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and foreign affairs columnist for the Washington Times. Cliff, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Is it about to get much, much worse?
Here is what we know about Putin and what he tends to do. He believes, and it's kind of a Leninist idea, that you need to probe with your bayonet. And if you feel mush, then you might as well march forward. If you feel steel, then you back off. So we don't know what he's going to do. He may not know what he's going to do. Richard Haass pointed out that in 2014, of course, he took Crimea away, cut off the peninsula from Ukraine, and has occupied it since. Also in 2014, he began to spark a conflict that has gone on ever since in this eastern territory of Ukraine, the Donbass region, which Donetsk and Luhansk will tell you more about in a minute. And there's been ongoing kind of low-intensity warfare there over the past 8 years, 15,000 people killed. But remember, we also have another example of this kind of behavior by Putin back in 2008.
Right.
He was angry that Georgia which was then an independent state, but also had once been part of the Soviet Empire, before that part of the Russian Empire. The Georgians were looking to the west, not to him. That displeased him. He sent in troops. What did he do? He carved off 2 provinces of Georgia. It's kind of like what he's doing here from the Georgian government. So I recognize their independence. And now South Ossetia and Abkhazia are both essentially Russian territories, although they're not claimed as such, but they are no longer part of Georgia. He could be doing the same thing here, but he also may think, you know what, I want to go further. It's time I went to Kiev. It's time I took all of Ukraine. And let me explain that. I've been writing about this for some years because I've been a Putin follower for years. I don't know if you know, I was in college with Putin. We didn't know each other, but I was an exchange student at the University of Leningrad at the same time that he was there. He thinks of himself as a czar. And the right proper title for a czar always was czar of all the Russias. All the Russias, what that meant? It meant Russia proper. It meant Belarus, White Russia, which is now a vassal state. He has troops there, as you know, threatening Ukraine. And of course, it meant Ukraine, which was also considered one of the Russias. But he wants more than that. He wants everything that the Russian Empire had and that the Soviet Union had as well. And he's pushing 70, so he's thinking, what do I have time to do? It's very important to me that look, he has everything he could possibly, he has more money than he can spend with $1 billion palace on the Black Sea. He has a girlfriend half his age, if the tabloids can be believed. He is restricted by no laws whatsoever. He essentially has some license to kill, which he exercises quite frequently. What does he want? A legacy, to be known as Vladimir the Great or Vladimir the Terrible, but a shaper of history, somebody who did his job, which is to restore the Russian Empire. That's what he is about.
In college, did you guys go whaling shirtless together or anything like that? Or?
Yeah, and having brewskis, you know, at the local bar.
Are you a Russian colluder? Are you a Russian colluder, Cliff May?
People, I don't know that I colluded. I don't know that I cooperated. I did drink a lot.
All right. So, Mr. May, you don't think sanctions are going to stop them, but what about Germany announcing today that they're halting the approval of Nord Stream 2 pipeline?
Well, that's helpful if they keep it up. I don't know how long they will. Germany has been very weak-kneed throughout this whole thing. Look, a few things are important here. One is serious punishments. I told you about 2008, what he did to Georgia. We talked about 2014, what he did in Crimea. Was he punished and penalized and treated as a pariah after that? No, not at all. Not at all. I can go over. He got the World Cup in 2018. He got the Winter Olympics, if you remember. You remember that Hillary Clinton brought a button and gave it to Foreign Minister Lavrov that said "reset" on it, and they pushed that button. It was misspelled, by the way, in Russian. And that was supposed to cure things. He's never, every time he does these things, he waits to see what will happen. And when nothing much happens, again, he can take his bayonet and continue to move forward. We should have been trying to solve this problem after 2008 when he invaded another country and took part of it. That is a violation of international law. That is a human rights violation. The UN, the UN Human Rights Council, they did nothing as usual about any of this. The international community was totally feckless. If they are this time, he will continue. And he will take Ukraine, and he will not stop there. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, by the way, those are NATO members. We would have an obligation to fight in those countries as we do not. The other thing that has happened, we should have been all along turning Ukraine into what's called a porcupine, meaning really difficult for a predator to digest. Over recent weeks, we have been making more of an effort, not Germany, but we and a lot of other NATO members. We will now see to what extent the Ukrainians decide that, you know what, we are going to defend ourselves whatever it takes, and we are going to leave Putin with a very bloody nose. We will see. I'm not predicting that will happen, but I'm saying that's a real possibility.
Well, we should have known as well when his stooge Yanukovych was deposed in Ukraine. I mean, when Yanukovych was there, he effectively had Ukraine as a satellite. When Zelensky comes in, he doesn't anymore, and I'm sure he didn't like that change, and so he always had his eye on rectifying the matter in Ukraine.
Exactly right. And you remember in 2019, first of all, was elected, overwhelmingly elected, and then there were parliamentary elections after that. I actually went over there as an observer for the International Republican Institute, and there's a pro-Russian party running. It was a free and a fair election, although the Russians manipulated it. But even so, the pro-Russian party only won 14% of the vote. I have no doubt that made Putin angry and disappointed, and he began to think, "What else shall I do?" But we don't know. So we don't know how far he is going to go right now. And again, he may not know. He may be thinking about it, talking with his generals, saying how much resistance are you finding in the East. The other possibility I just point out to you is if you're looking at a map, even in your mind, you see Donbass, the eastern region. But beyond that, on the very south, along the Black Sea, I think Putin would love to have, at the very least, a land bridge to Crimea, which he doesn't have right now. So he would just leave, he could take just that southern portion as well and make his own. Or he could go further. Ukraine is sort of separated into a western-eastern section, but the Dnieper River flows down through. Kiev is on the Dnieper River. He could try to say, I'm going to take everything east of it. But he also might want Kiev. The benefit of taking Kiev is now the country is his. The downside is the possibility of really bloody urban warfare inside Kiev if the Ukrainians say we're going to resist and we're going to do whatever is necessary, and there's going to be an insurgency and he won't like it.
We've given the Ukrainians these weapons. Is there any reason we don't want them to fight for their country, including these quote unquote separatist regions?
No, I think look, we can't. This is a very important point. I don't think we can take every country that wants to be in NATO, because essentially they become. It means America is going to protect them with help from some other NATO members, not all other NATO members. You can't do that. But what you really want is that for your allies to develop the capacity to defend themselves. You want them to be able to do that. We do not want to see tyrants with their jackboots destroying fledgling democracies. We do not want to see the sovereignty and independence of nations that are friends of ours being wiped away by tyrants. One of the things, it cannot just be that they rely on America to come in and save them. That's not enough. We need, like Israel. Israel says, I don't want any American troops defending us, but please don't undermine us, like
right.
as in Vienna, and help us, give us the means to defend ourselves against enemies that are common enemies that hate Americans too. We'll do that. We should have been doing that with Ukraine. We've done that to some extent. They may very well decide we are not going to be stripped of our independence and sovereignty by Vladimir Putin, not without a fight. But I'm not predicting. I'm saying that it's a serious possibility.
If you're right, and Putin has his eye on the Baltic states and Poland, and who knows where he goes from there, then how concerned should we be that his recent friendship with the Chinese communists would provide some aid and comfort to his efforts? I mean, if Putin can be a blunt object for Chinese communists in destabilizing Western Europe and to some extent America, then why wouldn't they provide as much cover for him as they could?
Yeah, then right now they're being somewhat, I would say, ambiguous about this for a number of reasons. But of course, Putin was guest of honor at the Beijing Olympics, which were taking place at the same time as the Uyghurs were being treated to genocide and other human rights violations were taking place, and yet they got to do this. But the important point here is that yes, as we should have recognized for some time, I've written about this as well. The totalitarians, the authoritarians, the dictators, the anti-democrats of this world are aligning against the U.S., and that means very much Putin in Russia, Xi Jinping in China, Ali Khamenei in Tehran and in Iran, Kim Jong-un in North Korea. They all have a common interest in seeing the United States diminished, humiliated, pushed out of any region they can push the U.S. out of, push the U.S. out of Middle East, push the U.S. out of Europe, destroy NATO, push the U.S. out of Asia. That's what they want to do, so they can establish a new world order where they are dominant and where they make the rules. That's what they want. They are glad to see an isolationist movement, or movements in the U.S. on the left and right, because if America will just go inside its borders, they can take over the rest of the world, and they'll deal with America later.
Putin had to expect that things like the Nord Stream 2 would be canceled or postponed, and the sanctions that are allegedly going to be imposed would be imposed, and so that there was going to be some economic pain for making this gambit. Of course, there's going to be economic pain the world over too, in terms of increased energy and food prices. But I assume that you believe that he anticipated this, and this is a pain that he believes that he can endure in service of his expansionist interests.
Absolutely. For one, if there are economic difficulties, it's not like the voters are going to, throw the bum out in the next election. That's not the way it works in Russia. Two, his economy is basically dependent on one thing: what? Oil and gas, right? You don't buy much else from Russia, even vodka. You buy from Tito's in Texas. So what he figures is, there'll always be a customer for oil and gas. And if the U.S. is limiting its production of oil and gas, that's only helpful to me. I can sell my oil and gas to China. They need it. I'll take as much as I can give them. It would be nice for Nord Stream 2 to go through, because then Germany and Europe will be more dependent on me. But oil and gas, it gets sold. So he's not terribly worried about that. And he's going to pick up some economic benefits if he does take over all or even just part of Ukraine. That eastern section he's looking at, as I said, east of the Dnieper River, that's where most of the Ukraine's oil and gas is located. Most of the industry is located there. The western part is more agricultural. Agricultural is important too. Lots of grain goes out from there to China, by the way, and to other countries. One of the reasons China may be a bit ambivalent about this, but no, I don't. Look, I think painful sanctions can be put on him. And should be immediately, which may give him pause before he goes and takes Kiev, as opposed to, again, it's not good if he takes Donbass, but better that he doesn't go into the rest of the country, because once he does that, then he thinks, what shall I do tomorrow? What do I want? What do I need?
He is Cliff May, president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's foreign affairs columnist for the Washington Times as well. Cliff, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Next time you're in the office, look around and see the paper accumulating and the filing cabinets taking up space waiting to be filled. You want the paper gone, but dread the time-consuming scanning process? Well, with IoT Smart Connected Scanning, it's never been easier to turn physical paper into digital documents and have them directly uploaded to the cloud. The need for PCs, cables, and tedious application software is eliminated. Anyone can set this device up in 5 minutes or less, saving your organization money, valuable time, and the hassle associated with IT. Remote employees can capture documents and send them seamlessly. This technology is adaptable to any environment and uses a hotspot without compromising security. If your goal is to organize documents efficiently and securely, IoT Smart Connected Scanning from IDT is for you. To see a demo or order now, go to ready4idt.com. That's ready4idt.com. Use promo code SMART and receive 10% off your order. IDT, putting paper in its place.
In the new year, you've been inundated with messages about top 10 health hacks and 3 ways to stick to your 2022 resolutions. It gets overwhelming and a bit tired, doesn't it? But the truth is, we do need to prioritize our health, especially our heart health. Nearly half of adults in the United States have high blood pressure. It's a health condition you can't afford to ignore, but you can learn to manage it, and 120 Life can start you on your way to lower numbers. 120 Life is a juice drink made of 6 natural ingredients, each proven to help lower blood pressure, including pomegranate and hibiscus. It's an 8-ounce bottle of I'm in control of my high